The echo of a gunshot in a crowded high school hallway is a sound that shatters worlds. But what happens when the blood spilled on the linoleum belongs to a forgotten street kid saving the daughter of a notorious outlaw? The answer sounds exactly like 300 Harley-Davidsons roaring through the silence. The biting November wind howled through the cracked window of a rusted 1998 Ford Taurus parked behind the abandoned textile mill on the edge of Oakhaven. Inside, 16-year-old Leo Miller pulled a threadbare moving blanket tighter around his thin shoulders. He had been living in the car for 6 months, ever since his mother lost her battle with pneumonia, and the state decided he belonged in a group home he had no intention of surviving. Leo was a ghost. He slipped through the cracks of society with practiced precision, existing on half-eaten cafeteria rolls and the quiet mercy of a local diner cook who occasionally left a bagged sandwich by the back dumpster. Leo's routine was a masterclass in invisibility. He would arrive at Oakhaven High School an hour before the first bell, slipping through the rusted side door near the boiler room to use the boys' locker room showers. He kept his clothes meticulously folded beneath a piece of cardboard in his trunk to avoid wrinkles. To the teachers, he was just a quiet, pale boy who sat in the back row. To the students, he was entirely non-existent. On the opposite end of Oakhaven's social stratosphere was Chloe Harrison. She wasn't popular in the traditional sense. She wasn't a cheerleader, and she didn't attend the weekend parties. Instead, she walked the halls wrapped in a terrifying aura of untouchability. Her father was Iron Jack Harrison, the vice president of the local Hells Angels charter. Everyone in town knew Iron Jack. He was a mountain of a man, covered in faded ink, who commanded respect with a mere narrowing of his eyes. The winged death head patch on his leather cut was a local symbol of both fear and raw, unfiltered power. Every morning, the deep, guttural rumble of Jack's customized Harley-Davidson Street Glide shook the windows of the school's front office as he dropped Chloe off. She would hop off the back, handing him his spare helmet, and he would give her a stern, protective nod. The unspoken rule at Oakhaven High was simple. Nobody messed with Chloe Harrison. A misplaced word, a spilled drink, or a disrespectful glance could summon a dozen heavily armed bikers to the school parking lot before the final bell rang. But beneath her tough exterior, the heavy combat boots, and the dark eyeliner, Chloe was suffocating. The reputation of the Hells Angels was a heavy armor she was forced to wear, isolating her from genuine connection. People didn't talk to her. They talked to the ghost of her father standing behind her. Their worlds collided on a Tuesday morning, entirely by accident. Leo was rushing down the C-wing hallway, his hands full of loose papers from a history assignment, his mind preoccupied with the gnawing ache of hunger in his stomach. He didn't see Chloe rounding the corner. They collided, a tangle of limbs and textbooks. Leo hit the floor hard, his history notes scattering like white doves across the scuffed linoleum. Panic seized him. He scrambled to his hands and knees, whispering frantic apologies, his head down. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't looking," he stammered, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew who she was. Everyone knew. Chloe knelt beside him. Instead of the venomous backlash he expected, her hands moved quickly, gathering his papers. "Hey, breathe," she said softly, her voice completely lacking the sharp edge she usually projected. "It's just paper. I'm not going to bite." Leo looked up, his wide, exhausted blue eyes meeting her dark brown ones. For a split second, the facade dropped. Chloe didn't see a nobody. She saw a boy whose cheekbones were too sharp, whose jacket was far too thin for November, and whose eyes held the profound, ancient sadness of someone who had lost everything. And Leo didn't see the fearsome daughter of a Hell's Angel. he saw a 15-year-old girl who looked incredibly lonely. She handed him the stack of papers. "You're Leo, right? We have biology together." "Yeah," he whispered, taking the papers with trembling hands. "Thank you." "Don't worry about it," she said, standing up and brushing off her jeans. She offered him a small, almost imperceptible smile before turning and walking away, her heavy boots clicking against the floor. Leo watched her go, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. It was the first time in 6 months someone had looked at him and actually seen him. Outside, the grey sky pressed down on the town of Oakhaven. In the student parking lot, a rusted sedan pulled into a visitor space. Silas Trent, a senior who had spent the last 3 years being relentlessly tormented by the school's athletic elite, turned off the ignition. His eyes were blank, devoid of any light or emotion. Reaching into the passenger seat, he unzipped a heavy canvas duffel bag, his fingers tracing the cold black steel resting inside. The time for being invisible was over. Third period was the quietest time of the day at Oakhaven High. The initial morning energy had burned off, replaced by the droning lectures of teachers and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clocks. Chloe was walking back from the counselor's office. She had an unexcused absence from the week prior, a day she had spent at the clubhouse while her father dealt with family business. The hallway was utterly deserted, a long tunnel of metal lockers and fluorescent lights buzzing with an artificial hum. Leo, meanwhile, was skipping gym class. He couldn't afford to shower during the day and risk someone noticing the state of his clothes or the bruises on his ribs from sleeping against a steering wheel. He was sitting on the top landing of the enclosed northern stairwell, a dead zone where the cameras didn't point, reading a battered paperback. At 10:14 a.m., the quiet was shattered. Pop, pop, pop. At first, it sounded like someone slamming heavy textbooks onto a desk, but then came the screams. They were not the playful shrieks of teenagers in the courtyard. They were visceral, tearing sounds that ripped through the heavy silence of the building. Then, the PA system crackled to life. The principal's voice, usually steady and monotonous, was pitched an octave higher, trembling with raw terror. "Code Red, this is not a drill. Lockdown! Code Red!" In the C-wing, Chloe froze. The heavy fire doors at the end of the corridor began to automatically swing shut, triggered by the alarm. She was trapped in the open expanse of the hallway. Adrenaline flooded her veins, freezing her boots to the floor. Teachers were slamming their classroom doors shut, the distinct click of deadbolts echoing like final judgments. "Hey, let me in!" Chloe yelled, running to the nearest door, pounding her fists against the reinforced glass. The teacher inside, tears streaming down her face, looked at Chloe with agonizing pity, but shook her head, backing away from the door. Protocol was protocol. You do not open the door once it is locked. From the intersection of the main hall, a shadow emerged. Silas Trent stepped into the C-wing. He was breathing heavily, his face pale and slick with sweat. In his hands, he held a semi-automatic rifle. The barrel was still smoking. He looked down the long corridor, and his dead, glassy eyes locked onto Chloe. He didn't know her. Not really. But he knew what she represented. She was power. She was untouchable, and today Silas wanted to touch the untouchables. He raised the barrel of the rifle. Up in the stairwell, Leo had heard the shots. His street instincts, honed by nights of surviving the darkest alleys of Oakhaven, kicked in immediately. Flight, hide, survive. He pushed open the heavy stairwell door just a crack to assess the hallway. He saw Chloe, pressed flat against the lockers, her hands raised, her tough exterior completely shattered. She was crying, a silent stream of tears cutting through her eyeliner. And 30 yards away, he saw Silas, walking slowly toward her, raising the gun. Leo had nothing. No family, no home, no future. His entire existence was a mathematical equation of calculating the calories he needed to survive the night. But as he looked at Chloe, he remembered the way she had knelt on the floor with him. He remembered the simple, profound dignity she had given him by remembering his name. He didn't think. The human body is not built to run toward the sound of gunfire, but Leo's legs moved before his brain could process the terrifying reality of his choice. He burst out of the stairwell just as Silas tightened his finger on the trigger. "Chloe, get down!" Leo screamed, his voice cracking, tearing through the hallway. Silas flinched, his aim shifting toward the sudden noise. The rifle barked, a deafening, concussive roar in the enclosed space. Leo dove across the hallway. He didn't tackle Chloe. He wrapped himself around her, spinning them so his back was to the shooter, pulling her down to the cold linoleum. The impact of the bullet was not like the movies. It was a massive, blunt-force trauma that felt like being struck by a speeding freight train. The round tore through Leo's left shoulder blade, shattering the bone and exiting through his collarbone in a mist of crimson. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs, exactly as they had earlier that morning, but this time the ground was instantly slick with blood. Leo gasped, all the air violently expelled from his lungs. A blinding, white-hot agony radiated from his chest, blurring his vision. He pinned Chloe to the floor beneath him, his blood soaking into her denim jacket. "Leo!" Chloe screamed, her hands immediately coming up, covered in dark, warm red. "Oh my God, Leo!" Silas took another step forward, racking the bolt of the rifle. He looked down at the two of them. Leo forced his eyes open, fighting the encroaching darkness. He turned his head, looking directly at the shooter. He knew Silas. They had sat near each other under the bleachers once during a rainstorm. Silas had been crying over a destroyed art project. Leo had been hiding from the cold. "Silas!" Leo choked out, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. Every word was glass in his throat. "Silas, please look at me." Silas stopped, the barrel wavering. "You don't want this," Leo gasped, his grip on Chloe tightening. "I know they hurt you, but she didn't. She didn't." Silas stared at the homeless boy bleeding out on the floor, protecting a girl who lived in a different universe than them both. The pure, unadulterated sacrifice in Leo's eyes pierced through Silas's psychotic break. The heavy metallic fog of rage in Silas's mind fractured. He looked at his hands, looked at the blood pooling on the white floor tiles, and suddenly realized what he was doing. The wail of police sirens breached the walls of the school, a rising crescendo of approaching authority. Silas lowered the weapon. He took a staggering step backward, dropping the rifle to the floor with a hollow clatter. Without another word, he turned and ran toward the cafeteria, where police would apprehend him 3 minutes later, sitting quietly at a lunch table with his head in his hands. In the C-wing, the silence returned, heavier and more suffocating than before. Chloe scrambled out from under Leo, pulling his head into her lap, her hands pressed desperately against the gaping wound on his shoulder, trying to stem the torrential flow of blood. "Hold on, Leo. Just hold on," she sobbed, rocking him back and forth. Leo looked up at her, his vision swimming. The fluorescent lights above looked like halos. He felt cold, colder than the nights in the Ford Taurus. "Did he get you?" Leo whispered, his eyelids fluttering. "No," Chloe cried, pressing harder against his chest. "No, you saved me. You stupid, brave idiot. You saved me." Leo managed a faint, bloody smile. "Good," he murmured. "You have people waiting for you." His eyes rolled back, and the ghost of Oakhaven High finally faded into the dark. The chaotic aftermath of the Oakhaven High shooting was a blur of flashing red and blue lights, screaming sirens, and the frantic shouts of tactical police units clearing the building. Paramedics burst through the heavy fire doors of the C-wing, their boots slipping on the blood-slicked linoleum. They found Chloe Harrison on the floor, her hands pressed desperately against the chest of a boy who looked entirely too fragile to have absorbed a high-velocity rifle round. Leo was completely unresponsive. His skin had turned a translucent, terrifying shade of grey. The paramedics shoved Chloe gently aside, immediately packing the massive exit wound near his collarbone with hemostatic gauze and starting an intraosseous IV right into his shin bone because his veins had collapsed from blood loss. "We're losing him," a paramedic shouted, strapping an oxygen mask over Leo's face as they hoisted him onto a gurney. "Subclavian artery is nicked. Tension pneumothorax. Let's move, move, move!" Chloe stumbled blindly behind them, her jeans and favorite denim jacket soaked completely through with Leo's blood. A police officer tried to stop her, trying to guide her toward the triage tent for uninjured students, but she fought him off like a wildcat, her eyes locked on the gurney disappearing out the double doors. 20 miles away, at the heavily fortified Hells Angels clubhouse on the outskirts of Oakhaven, the heavy oak doors vibrated from the blaring ringtone of the landline. Clayton Grizzly Ford, the charter's sergeant-at-arms, picked it up. He listened for 10 seconds before slamming the receiver down so hard the plastic cracked. Grizzly walked into the main garage where Iron Jack Harrison was deep in the engine block of a '69 Shovelhead. "Jack," Grizzly said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a grim weight that made the other 5 bikers in the room stop dead. "Shooting at the high school. It's bad." Jack dropped his wrench. The heavy steel tool clattered against the concrete floor, echoing like a gunshot. He didn't ask questions. He didn't blink. Within 60 seconds, the roar of a dozen heavy V-twin engines tore through the quiet country roads. They didn't stop for red lights. They didn't stop for stop signs. The local police cruisers, recognizing the formation of the Hells Angels tearing toward the city, quickly pulled over to let them pass, knowing better than to stand between Iron Jack and his daughter. When Jack and his crew arrived at Oakhaven General Hospital, the emergency room lobby was a madhouse of sobbing parents, local news crews, and heavily armed police officers. Jack parted the crowd like Moses at the Red Sea. He stood 6'4", his leather cut displaying the notorious death head patch, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying fury. Grizzly, Snake, and 3 other full-patch members flanked him, their hands resting on their heavy belt buckles. "Where is she?" Jack demanded, to a terrified triage nurse. Before the nurse could stammer out a reply, a small, blood-soaked figure launched herself from a plastic waiting room chair. Chloe collided with her father, burying her face into his chest. Jack's massive arms enveloped her, his calloused hands checking her back, her arms, feeling for injuries. "I'm okay, Dad. I'm okay," she sobbed into his leather vest. "But he's dying. Dad, he's dying, and it's my fault." Jack pulled back, his dark eyes scanning the thick, wet blood on his daughter's clothes. "Whose blood is this, Chloe? Who did this?" "His name is Leo," she choked out, her voice trembling violently. "He pushed me down. He jumped in front of the gun, Dad. The shooter was aiming right at me, and Leo took the bullet. He wrapped himself around me." The fierce, protective rage in Jack's eyes shifted into something entirely different. Profound, unbreakable debt. In the world of the Hells Angels, a life saved is a blood debt that transcends all other laws of society. "Where is he?" Jack asked, his voice deathly quiet. "Surgery," Chloe whispered. "They said his heart stopped in the ambulance." The hours that followed were agonizing. The Hells Angels effectively took over the east wing of the waiting room. Nobody asked them to leave. The police kept a respectful distance. Jack sat entirely still, his arm wrapped around his daughter, staring a hole through the double doors of the surgical ward. At 4 p.m., a trauma surgeon, looking utterly exhausted and covered in surgical scrubs, stepped through the doors. Jack stood up, the leather of his boots creaking loudly in the quiet room. "Family of Leo Miller?" the surgeon asked, looking around the room, confused by the heavy biker presence. "Right here," Jack said, stepping forward, effectively daring the doctor to question his relation to the boy. The surgeon swallowed hard. He survived the surgery. It was close. The bullet shattered his left clavicle, missed his heart by an inch, and tore through his lung. He's on a ventilator. But there's a complication. "What kind of complication?" Grizzly growled from behind Jack. "It's not just the gunshot," the doctor sighed, rubbing his forehead. "When we ran his blood work and examined him, this boy is suffering from severe, prolonged malnutrition. He has early-stage scurvy, untreated cracked ribs that are weeks old, and frostbite damage on his toes. We contacted the school and child services. They said he's officially listed as a ward of the state. He's been living in a car." Chloe gasped, her hands covering her mouth. The quiet boy who apologized for dropping his papers, the boy who threw his fragile body in front of an assault rifle, was slowly starving to death in the shadows of their town. "The state social worker is on her way," the surgeon continued carefully, "because he has no insurance, no legal guardian, and requires incredibly expensive reconstructive surgeries to ever use his left arm again. The county administration is ordering him transferred to the underfunded state facility downtown as soon as he is stabilized tonight. We don't have the authorization to keep him in the ICU here." Jack's jaw tightened. The veins in his neck bulged against his tattoos. A boy who had spilled his own blood to save a Hell's Angel was about to be tossed into a broken system to be forgotten. "The hell he is," Jack said, his voice rumbling like an idling engine. The twist in Leo's fate did not come from a medical miracle, but from the brutal, unyielding loyalty of the outlaw code. When the hospital administrator, a sharp-featured man named Dr. William Orris, arrived with the state social worker to facilitate Leo's transfer, he found his path blocked. Standing in front of the entrance to the intensive care unit were 4 massive men in leather cuts, their arms crossed. Dr. Orris bristled. "Gentlemen, you need to step aside. We are transferring the Miller boy to County General. He is a ward of the state, and this is a private, high-tier medical facility. He does not have the coverage to occupy this bed." Iron Jack stepped out of the ICU room, closing the door softly behind him. He walked up to the administrator, looking down at him with eyes that had seen decades of street warfare. "The boy stays," Jack stated simply. "Mr. Harrison, I understand your daughter was involved, but you have no legal standing here," Dr. Orris said, adjusting his glasses, trying not to show his intimidation. "The surgeries he needs will cost upwards of $200,000. The state will not pay our rates. He must be moved." Jack didn't argue. He reached into his heavy leather jacket, pulled out a thick, vacuum-sealed brick of $100 bills, and slammed it onto the nearby nurse's station counter. The heavy thud made the administrator jump. "That's $50,000 in cash as a down payment," Jack growled, stepping so close to Aris that the administrator could smell the motor oil and stale tobacco on him. "You will put him in your best VIP recovery suite. You will get the best reconstructive surgeon in the state. If the boy wakes up and his pillow is too flat, I will hold you personally responsible." "You want to talk about legal standing?" "My club's lawyers are filing emergency foster care paperwork right now. He is under the protection of the Hells Angels. Do we have an understanding, Doctor?" Harris looked at the cash, then up at the terrifying wall of men backing Jack up. He swallowed dryly and nodded. I'll inform the surgical team. 3 days later, Leo finally opened his eyes. The room was aggressively bright. He blinked against the harsh light, panic immediately seizing his chest. The pain in his shoulder was a dull, heavy throbbing, dulled by heavy narcotics. He tried to move, to get up, his mind instantly flashing back to the cold leather of his rusted Ford Taurus. He had to move the car before the police ticketed him. Easy, kid. Don't move. Leo turned his head. Sitting in a leather armchair beside the bed was a mountain of a man covered in tattoos. Beside him, holding Leo's right hand, was Chloe. She looked exhausted, but a radiant smile broke across her face when she saw he was awake. "Chloe?" Leo croaked, his throat feeling like sandpaper. "Are you okay? Did he—" "I'm perfectly fine, Leo," Chloe whispered, tears spilling over her eyelashes. "Because of you. You saved my life." Leo relaxed slightly, sinking back into the pillows. He looked around the massive, luxurious hospital room. "Where am I? I can't afford this. I need to leave. If the state finds out I'm here, they'll send me to the juvenile group home. I can't go back there." Jack leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on his knees. "Nobody is sending you anywhere, son," Jack said, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. "My name is Jack. I'm Chloe's father." Leo's eyes widened in terror. He knew who Iron Jack was. Everyone knew. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" "Stop!" Jack commanded softly. "You listen to me, Leo. You had nothing in this world. You were living in a freezing car, starving, with nobody looking out for you. But when the devil walked down that hallway, you didn't run. You threw away your life to protect my little girl. You gave her the breath in your lungs." Jack reached out, his massive, calloused hand gently resting on Leo's uninjured shoulder. "In my world, blood pays for blood. But you gave blood to save it," Jack continued, his eyes shining with unshed emotion. "So the debt is mine, and my club's. You don't have to worry about a hospital bill. You don't have to worry about a car. And you sure as hell don't have to worry about the state putting you in a home." Leo stared at him, completely overwhelmed, the monitor beside him beeping slightly faster as the reality of the words sank in. For the first time since his mother died, the crushing, suffocating weight of survival began to lift from his chest. 2 weeks later, the day of Leo's discharge arrived. The air in Oakhaven was crisp and cold. He was in a wheelchair, his left arm heavily immobilized in a metal brace, but his cheeks had color, and he was wearing a brand-new, heavy leather jacket that Chloe had bought him. The nurse wheeled him toward the automatic sliding doors of the main entrance. Jack and Chloe walked beside him. "I still don't understand how you got the judge to agree to the foster placement," Leo said, looking up at Jack. "Judges like to be re-elected," Jack smirked. "And they don't like it when a highly motivated, well-funded motorcycle club hires the most vicious corporate lawyers in the state to argue on behalf of a local hero. You're coming home with us, kid." As the sliding doors parted, a sound hit Leo like a physical shockwave. It was a low, guttural, earth-shaking rumble that vibrated through the concrete floor and rattled the glass windows of the hospital. Leo looked out into the parking lot, and his breath caught in his throat. The entire circular driveway, stretching all the way down the block and onto the main street, was filled with motorcycles. There weren't just a few. There were 300 Hells Angels, charters from across the entire state, and some from neighboring states had ridden through the freezing November wind. They sat on their custom choppers, baggers, and cruisers, wearing their cuts proudly. As Leo's wheelchair emerged into the sunlight, 300 bikers began to simultaneously rev their engines. The deafening roar was a symphony of raw, unfiltered respect. It was a terrifying, beautiful sound that drowned out the sirens, the fear, and the ghosts of Leo's past. In the center of the formation, Grizzly sat on a massive, custom-built trike with a padded passenger seat. He patted the seat, looking right at Leo. The state social worker, standing near the entrance with a clipboard, watched in absolute, stunned silence as the homeless boy she had nearly thrown into a neglected system was carefully lifted from his wheelchair by Iron Jack. Jack placed Leo securely onto the back of the trike. Chloe climbed onto the back of her father's street glide. Jack kicked his bike into gear, looking over his shoulder at the boy who had saved his world. "You ready to go home, Leo?" Leo looked at the 300 outlaws who had gathered to escort a forgotten street kid into his new life. He felt the heavy leather of his jacket, the warmth of the sun, and the undeniable presence of family. "Yeah," Leo smiled, tears finally falling down his cheeks. "I'm ready." With a final, unified thunderclap of exhaust pipes, the column of 300 Hell's Angels pulled out of the hospital lot, riding in a tight, protective formation around the boy who was no longer invisible. The echo of the gunshot was replaced by the thunder of 300 engines. Leo Miller, the invisible ghost of Oakhaven, stepped in front of a bullet and found a family forged in blood, leather, and gasoline. True heroism doesn't ask permission, and brotherhood doesn't check a bank account. Sometimes, the strongest angels on earth are the ones riding straight out of hell to bring you safely home.